Joining me now is conservative attorney George Conway. So I just wanted to start with this big question. I mean, he clearly is ranting and raving and a little bit losing his mind outside of the courtroom.
Whatever he had left.
Well, his adult children are all going to testify over the next 9 days. You've followed him a long time. I mean, you've watched him. How do you think this is all impacting him psychologically?
Well, you can see it. You can see it in the clips. He's making mistakes. He's babbling incoherently even more than usual. This is really striking, as your intro pointed out, at the heart of his persona. I mean, this is who he was. He was the mogul. He was the mogul with The Apprentice, and he's been that in New York for 50 years. And now it's coming crashing down. He's already been found to have committed fraud, that his books and records, his statements of financial condition are false. And the judge has already ruled that there was no triable issue of fact on whether or not they were false. And as a result, the judge ordered that the Trumps and the Trump organization's ability to do business in the state of New York should be invalidated. And that puts him out of business, which means he's going to have to liquidate everything, including places like Mar-a-Lago, which are owned by New York LLCs. But then the question of, well, how much of the proceeds of those sales, when he has to be put out of business, go to the state of New York? And that's what this is about. And it tells you a lot.
Yeah,
what tells you a lot here is the witness list. Who's calling these witnesses?
Yes.
The state is calling Eric, Don Jr., Ivanka, and Donald himself, which tells you something. They don't have a story. They don't have a story to explain the two sets of books that Alan Weisselberg kept, where you were reporting one thing to the tax authorities, reporting another thing to banks, or for bragging purposes. And the documents, that, as the judge said in his opinion, it's a document case, and the documents. Well, some of the documents had lies, but they don't lie about the fact that they show that it was all fake.
All of it. So let's go just back to what could potentially happen here. Because when you just said Mar-a-Lago could be liquidated, I think people might be like, wait, what? Because isn't he rich? He's already been convicted of fraud here. But what the total size of this? It sounds like your belief is that he could have to sell a lot of his assets. Yeah. He doesn't have liquid funding to pay this.
Right. He can't. In other words, he cannot operate a business in the state of New York if Justice Engoron's decision so far stands. He will lose his certificate to the extent he has foreign corporations or foreign entities, meaning out-of-state entities, doing business in New York. Their right to do business in New York is canceled, as is the certificates of incorporation of the various LLCs and companies that he himself owns that are incorporated in New York. So he can't do business. And then, the answer is that the result will be everything's put into receivership and has to be sold. And obviously the shareholders will get their money, except to the extent that this trial finds that some of the money should go to the state. So this is a death blow to Trump's businesses.
Huge impact. Now, Trump is testifying coming up in a week. He could took the fifth nearly 450 times.
Well, I think it was, yes, 440. Yeah, 440.
440. Okay, 440 for 50.
Eric was 500. Right?
Okay, 440 for 50. Well, we'll agree somewhere in between there.
And all in one day, which is pretty impressive.
Which is quite a lot. That's a lot of pleading the fifth. Yeah. Now, he could take the fifth in this case as well when he testifies, right?
In theory, he could, although he did come back for a deposition. The problem for him is that in a criminal case, if a defendant doesn't have to testify against himself, that's what the Constitution guarantees, and you cannot infer guilt from a defendant's refusal to testify or his invocation of the Fifth Amendment. But in a civil case, if you assert the Fifth Amendment, the trier of fact, whether it be the judge, here it's the judge, or the jury, in a jury case, can say, oh, he must have committed a crime. He thinks he did something wrong. And they can infer, and the jury would be, if there were a jury, the jury would be instructed that they can make an adverse finding on the questions that were asked. So what was the basis for this financial statement? I take the fifth. And the jury would be entitled to conclude, or Justice Engoron is entitled to conclude, there was no basis.
Sounds guilty if you take the fifth. So as he's kind of watching his children testify here, what is he on edge that he's worried about hearing over the next couple of days?
I think he's going to be on edge hearing them admit that they didn't have a basis for things, or saying that Daddy told me to do it. That's what I would be worried about if I were him. But I don't know. I don't know what they're going to say. That's what That's
wildly interesting to
watch.
So this won't surprise you, I'm sure. But he's been fundraising off of
course, grift.
He's been fundraising off of the 14th Amendment challenge to his candidacy in Colorado. You can't make it up sometimes, but there's really no consequences to that. I mean, should there be? Could there be?
What do you mean, consequences?
I don't know. That he's fundraising off of these legal cases against him?
Actually, I think there should have been consequences, and there may yet still be consequences for the fundraising he did during the interregnum, when he was claiming that the election was rigged and saying that in trying to hold on to office, and he was saying he needed all this money he was raising all this money for legal challenges. Of course, it's hard to spend $250 million, which is what he raised in 2020 to early 2021 on legal fees. I mean, and he didn't, and those fees have been used for that money has been used for other purposes. So the question really is what are they saying to the potential marks, I will call them, who to send in their money? Are they lying to them? If so, I think that's fraud.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot to watch in this case. You don't even know what the children are going to say. So thank you so much for coming in today. Really appreciate talking.
1 hour and 15 minutes. That's how long it took Donald Trump to commit what might be a violation of a newly reinstated gag order that was placed on him by a federal judge. Last night at 7:06 p.m., Judge Tanya Chutkan reinstated her gag order on Trump in the 2020 election case brought by special counsel Jack Smith. The gag order had been put on pause for 9 days while Judge Chutkan reconsidered her decision and heard new arguments from the special counsel and Donald Trump's criminal defense team. Trump's attorneys wanted it removed on First Amendment grounds, but Judge Chutkan reiterated in her ruling last night that, quote, as the court has explained, the First Amendment rights of participants in criminal proceedings must yield, when necessary, to the orderly administration of justice. And contrary to defendant's argument, the right to a fair trial is not his alone, but belongs also to the government and the public. Defendants' repeated appeals to broad First Amendment values therefore ignored that the court, pursuant to its obligation to protect the integrity of these proceedings, recognized those values, but in balancing them against the potential prejudice resulting from certain kinds of statements, found them outweighed. The gag order limits what Trump can say about potential witnesses in the case, as well as the special counsel and his staff. But it does not stop him from attacking President Biden, the Justice Department, or even Judge Chutkan herself. One of those potential witnesses is Trump's former Attorney General, William Barr, who Trump slammed on social media last night a little more than an hour after the judge had filed her decision. At 8:21 p.m. last night, Trump posted, quote, I called Bill Barr dumb, weak, slow-moving, lethargic, gutless, and lazy. A rhino who couldn't do the job. That's in all caps if you're listening. Bill Barr is a loser, all caps. Judge Chutkan and the special counsel's team have not yet responded to the social media attack on Bill Barr, but the remarks are part of a pattern for the former president. While the gag order was on pause last week, Trump lashed out at another potential key witness in the case, Mark Meadows. On Tuesday last week, Trump weighed in on a report from ABC News that Meadows, Trump's former White House chief of staff, had testified in the case under an immunity deal. In the social media post, Trump insinuated that Meadows' testimony was a, quote, lie, a comment Judge Chutkan has now concluded would have been a violation of the gag order, writing in her decision last night, quote, this statement would almost certainly violate the order under any reasonable definition of targeting. The statement singles out a foreseeable witness for purposes of characterizing his potentially unfavorable testimony as a, quote, lie, quote, made up to secure immunity, and it attacks him as a, quote, weakling and coward if he provides that unfavorable testimony, an attack that could readily be interpreted as an attempt to influence or prevent the witness's participation in this case. Trump and his attorneys are appealing Judge Chutkan's decision on the gag order, and in just a moment, we will hear from former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neil Katyal about their prospects. But it's worth remembering that in a separate trial, a New York judge in the civil fraud case against Trump has already found Trump to have committed two separate violations of a different gag order. After the second violation, the judge fined Trump $10,000 and threatened to imprison him, a penalty that highlights the difficulty of enforcing a gag order on a former president of the United States. Leading off our discussion tonight, Neil Katyal, former acting Solicitor General of the United States and host of the podcast Courtside with Neil Katyal, and Paul Butler, a professor of law at Georgetown University and former federal prosecutor. They are both MSNBC legal analysts. Neil, give us your reaction to Judge Chutkan's decision to reinstate the limited gag order in this case. And do you agree that Trump is unlikely to succeed on the merits in his appeal?
The judge, is absolutely right. And no, I don't think there's any chance Trump is going to succeed on his appeal. So, look, I mean, first of all, Trump is basically trying to win his court case the same way as he tried to win the 2020 election, which is to mix up a bunch of his lawlessness and his intimidation and combine it together. And the judge's order here is really hard to appeal. He's going to try, just like he tried 62 times in 2020 with different courts to try and claim some sort of election problems, and he lost them all, and he's going to lose this. And he's going to lose this, Jonathan, for two reasons. One is the judge's order is very surgical. It even allows Trump to attack Biden, attack a lot of things. The one thing she said you can't do, foment violence against witnesses or intimidate the truth-seeking process. And that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing. And that's the second point why I think she's on such firm ground. No one on this planet Earth has made a better case for why this gag order needs to be in effect than a guy named Donald Trump. He provided the very best evidence against his motion. And you were referring to that earlier, Jonathan, when you talked about his tweets about Bill William Barr, his tweets about Mark Meadows. All of this shows the gag order is absolutely necessary because Trump is dangerous. He's a danger to the witnesses. He's a danger to the prosecutors who he lies about. And most of all, he's a danger to the rule of law.
You know, Paul, the judge in Trump's civil fraud trial in New York has seemed reluctant to bring the hammer down on Trump for gag order violations, only fining him $5,000 for his first violation, $10,000 for his second, but not much of a penalty for a so-called billionaire, self-described billionaire. How do you think Judge Chutkan will handle any violations?
I think it's going to be also with fines. She has the power to put Trump in jail if he continues to violate. But I think that's extremely unlikely unless he does something super egregious that the judge thinks is putting people's lives in danger. But the two fines last week from the judge in the civil fraud case weren't the only times that Trump has been sanctioned in that case. Last year, where Trump refused to do something that he had to do, which is to turn over documents to Letitia James, then the judge held him in contempt and fined him $110,000. Jonathan, guess what? That worked. So fines may actually work on the former president, but the $15,000 that Trump was fined last week was chump change. It's got to be billion-dollar or fines that are suited for a billionaire that might make a difference.
Did he pay that $110,000? He paid it. Okay, because,